Now, if you've opened up the exercise slide, this will be the one that you're presented with. Now, I've already added in a few different elements already, just to save us a little bit of time. And you can see even off the side of the slide, I've given you a few of those kind of GIF animations, as well as a little bit of content. The clouds are really just circles using merge shapes, just to cut away in gradient colors. And I've just chopped off the head of one of my figurines and just given them a bit of a gradient color as well. So all pretty straightforward stuff, and format background with one of our pictures there. But what we're interested in, as I said, is really just drawing those gears. Now, before we do any drawing whatsoever, one thing I would remind you, typically when we draw diagrams, make sure you just have your guides open. Your guides are these kind of vertical and horizontal lines that you'll see on your slide. It just helps you position objects a bit better. If you have them up, fantastic. But if you haven't got them there, or you've forgotten how to bring up your guides, just remember, go to your View tab and of course, just click Guides. So without the tick mark there, you don't see them. Put the tick mark on and it's there. Now, we will draw our gear on a separate slide and we'll copy and paste it back to this slide in just a moment. So all I'm going to do is just go to the Home tab. I'll go to New Slide and just put in a blank slide. So we'll draw it on the blank slide first and then copy and paste it back into the original one. So let's go ahead and draw our gear. Now, the first shape we need is kind of interesting because there's a shape that most of you probably don't use. But if you go to Insert tab and go to Shapes, and we'll just scroll down a little bit. Now you'll find this under Stars and Banners. Now for the time being, I'm using a 12-point star, but you can choose whichever star you wish to use, depending on number of spokes that you want to see on your gear. So before we draw this shape, just remember to hold down the Shift key and lock it into that 1:1 aspect ratio. So click the 12-point star, hold down the Shift key, and let's just draw out our star shape. There we go. Now, using the guides to help us, place that star right in the middle of your horizontal and vertical guide, just as we've done here. Now, like with many shapes, you do have a yellow edit point that we can move up or down to make this less pointed or very pointed. But for the star shape, we're just going to drag it down very, very subtly. So do drag it downwards just a little bit, just have a little bit more of an angled point there. Now, for the gears, of course, when we look at a gear, there's a flatness to the gear head. It's not a spike like this. So we need to flatten off the gear head. So all we're going to do is use another shape just to chop off the heads of this star. And the easiest way to do it is use this shape. If you're going to insert and go to Shapes, we're going to use the donut shape. Of course, it's been updated and now it's called Circle Hollow. But I've used PowerPoint for so long, it's always been called donut. So I'll call it a donut. So let's go ahead and use the donut or circle hollow shape. But remember, as you do this, hold down the Shift key once you draw it. So Shift key down, draw out the donut shape, make it nice and big, that's fine. But once you've drawn it, just make sure you put it in the middle of your guides. So your horizontal and vertical guide. You can see on my one, I'm not even worried about how big I've drawn it. It goes beyond the slide. That's fine. Essentially, what you do need to make sure is the outer circumference of your donut exceeds the size of your star. Okay, that's all you really need to do. But more importantly, it's actually the inner part of this donut that I'm interested in, especially the yellow edit point, because you can make that donut thinner or thicker. But what we're going to do is position the inner part of that. So it's going to chop away the top parts of that star, just like you see here. So just use that edit point to position it where we're going to chop away the top parts. Okay, now that we've done that, we need to use our merge shape function. And don't forget about the two guidelines that I mentioned in the introduction and probably in other exercises. So first little guideline, the shape that we want to keep is generally the shape we select first. So click the star shape, hold down the Shift key, and then select the donut shape. With those two shapes now selected, go to Shape Format tab, and on the left-hand side, Merge Shapes. And we're going to select Merge Shapes, Subtract. And as you can see here, it's just subtracting shape B away from shape A. There we go. Now, we've done the first part. We've blunted off the tops of the points there, but also in between. If you look at the interior of this star, again, it shouldn't be pointed. If it's a gear, then the interior should also have a little bit of a flat surface like the gear head itself. And to do that, we're just going to use a circle. So we'll go to Insert, we'll go to Shapes, and I'm just going to use an oval with the Shift key. So select your oval, Shift key down, and just draw out your circle. Once again, just place that in the middle of your guides, just like this. Now, if you find your circle is too big or too small, what I would recommend is once you've placed it in the middle of your guides, hold down your two keys, the Shift key and the Control key, because the Control key will keep it centered and the Shift key will keep the ratio in place. And of course, then you can sort of just resize it accordingly. But what you're really trying to do is just sort of position it where you're having more of a flat edge on the interior rather than that steep angle that we saw earlier. Or another way is lots of chairs around a round dinner table. Okay, and so that's what we've got. That's where it's positioned. I'm now going to hold down the Shift key and select the star shape. So those two shapes are now selected. I'm going to go back to Merge Shapes and we're going to select Union. And this will just merge those two shapes into one. So select Merge Shapes, Union. And that, for all intents purposes, is your gear. The first one is done. Pretty straightforward. But we want to create kind of two variations of this gear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the gear shape and put the duplicate version off to one side. So we want to keep this one as one variation of it. And this one here, we're going to create a slightly different variation. And so in this case, I'm going to use a donut shape. Now, honestly, you could practice and experiment and be creative with the different types of shapes you put in the middle to create the different types of gears that you want. But I've just gone ahead and used a ordinary donut or circle hollow shape. I'll pop this in the middle. So again, it's all lined up neatly. But remember, I do want to keep the gear shape. So I'll select that one first, hold down the Shift key, and then select the donut shape. And then Merge Shapes, Subtract. So Merge Shapes, Subtract. And there's my second gear. Okay, so I'm going to push this off to one side. I'm going to just duplicate the first one again because it's a nice base from which to start from. And we'll just do one more variation and then we'll put it back into our diagram. For the final variation then, I'm going to keep all of these pretty simple, but I'm just going to draw a big circle and pop this one here. So maybe I'll make that a little bit smaller. We'll just make sure that's in the middle of our guides and that looks okay. And then again, for the final version, click the gear, hold down the Shift key, select the circle. We'll go to Merge Shapes and Subtract. And there it is. There are our three gear combinations. So now we need to actually just put these back into our original slide. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and just select all three of them. We're going to just copy, so Control C. I'll scroll back upwards to the original slide and Control V to paste it. Now, I'm going to resize them first since all of them are selected. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key. I'm just going to take it from this corner edit point and move it diagonal downwards to the left to resize them just like this. Again, since they're all selected, I'll also recolor them as well. I'll keep the color pretty simple, so I'll go to Shape Fill. I'm looking for my dark purple color, but I'm going to choose maybe the fourth hue or fourth variation of that color in that column of different variations there. Okay, so I'm going to click on this one, remove any shape outline. So shape outline, no outline. Now it's a case of just positioning them just like this. So my gear colors are pretty subtle. So if you find that they're too soft, again, you can change the colors and maybe I'll swap this back to, maybe I'll make it this one. It's a little bit clearer. So under my variations, I'm just going to pick the third one down there. But essentially, I'll just put my gears in position just like this. There we go. And I'll zoom in a bit so you can see what's going on. Fantastic. So now we've got our gears. We've done our gear shapes. We've colored them. And now they're all in position. The final thing we really need to do, at least for the gears, is just to animate them. As I said, I don't want to leave them static. Gear mechanisms are meant to move. So with them all selected, go to Animations tab and open up your animation pane on the right-hand side. And we'll select Add Animation next. And this is a very simple emphasis effect, and this is spin. So click on spin, and you'll see a quick little preview there. Now, clearly these are spinning a little bit too fast, so we're going to slow that down, and obviously we want it to continue spinning as well. So in your animation pane at the moment, you can see all three are selected, and you might be able to see that small black drop-down arrow, which I'm going to go ahead and click on, and go to timing. And so there's only a couple of changes we need to make. So start will be with previous, so it starts at the same time. Duration, I already know is a little bit too fast. 20 seconds may be a bit too slow. So maybe I'll just type 10 inside of there. And then repeat until end of slide. Now, of course, I can change the time on the time bars and on the main ribbon, but we'll just put about 10 seconds. You can just type that in there. So start with previous, duration is 10 seconds, and repeat until end of slide, and we'll click OK. And that looks okay for one little thing, and that's this gear here. So that center gear, the middle gear, has to be moving in the opposite direction. Otherwise, those gear mechanisms are not really going to work properly. That's an easy fix. So just click on that center gear, go to Effect Options, and just select counterclockwise. Now, if you want to do a quick preview, just to make sure everything looks okay, you can go to Slideshow. And now in Slideshow, we can see that that looks pretty okay. So all the gears are moving at a reasonable speed. And of course, we've changed the center gear, so that's moving in the right position. All that's left for us to do is just add in the last few elements. Okay. Now, before I move any of the elements which are off the slide onto the slide, one thing that we had was a little bit of a light beam coming from the eyes of this kind of figurehead here, because he's thinking, maybe he's looking ahead, looking towards the future, maybe he's being preemptive or proactive. It's just a kind of visual representation of that concept. So it's just a simple shape with a gradient color. So I'm going to go to Insert and go to Shapes, and I'm going to select a trapezoid shape. You do not need the Shift key when we draw this one. So just draw it out nice and long like this. And we're going to rotate it by 90 degrees clockwise, just like that. And here, of course, you can make those adjustments by maybe stretching it and just using the yellow edit point just to close it in a little bit like this. Now, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit just to let you know about this part here. Now, as you can see, do not worry about overlapping the shape against the head here. Don't try to line it up exactly like this because you're not going to get it perfectly lined up, but don't stretch it too far into the head either. So a little bit of an overlap is fine. Now, later on, I will show you how to do a nice clean cut. So that shape will be in perfect alignment with the head later on. And there's two ways of doing it. We can use edit points or we can use merge shapes to do it. So we'll use merge shapes a bit later. Let's just color it first. So let's just scroll outwards and open up our Format Shape box. So under our Format Shape box, I'm just going to undock it. I'm going to go to Fill and Gradient Fill. Now again, as with many exercises, I only really need two colors here. So I won't worry about type or direction just yet, but I am going to remove some of those stops. So I'll just get rid of a couple of those. And just to check, just to make sure we only have two colors or two stops, it should say of two, one of two and two of two. So very carefully select one of two and push that all the way to the left-hand side. And we're just going to change this to a white color. And stop two of two, we'll make sure it's on the right-hand side, and we'll change that to a white color as well. Now, the only difference is for stop 2, we're going to increase the transparency to 100%, And already you can see we kind of have that effect of that beam of light, that torchlight effect there. Now, the only thing I might need to do here is for stop 1, I just want to reduce the tone of that first color. It's a bit too bright, so I'm going to tone it down. And the way I'm going to do that is just go back to stop 1 of 2 and increase the transparency a little bit. And that looks about right for me, but I am going to get rid of that line. So line and no line. We'll just get rid of that gray outline. Okay, now as I said, we've got one little issue, which is we want to make this a little bit neater here. So we want it to line up with the head exactly. And we're just going to use our merge shapes to do that. So click on the head shape and duplicate it. Control D. And then we're going to put that head shape right on top of the original one, just like that. So click the light beam first, because that's the shape we want to keep. Hold down the Shift key and then select the duplicate head shape. With those two now selected, just go to Merge Shapes and Shape Subtract. And as you can see now, if I zoom back in, this should be perfectly aligned to the head. So we don't have to worry about any overlap and things like this. And it just tidies up the diagram in general. Now, just before we finish it off, let's just put in the remaining elements. So let's just position our GIF animations. I'll put this one here. I'll place this one here. And as for the text, we probably need to bring the text to the front because obviously this is behind some of our other objects, including our light beam. I'll just put this one here. And one final touch before we completely finish this one off. If I look towards my GIF animation here, it's nice that the guy is kind of cranking the gears, but obviously there's no attachment between the figure and the actual gear mechanism. So I'm going to put a kind of little chain between the gear and the actual mechanism that is rotating. To do this, I'm just going to use a free form line and I'm going to draw it pretty quickly, in fact. So I'm just going to use my free form line. You could also just do this by drawing 2 straight lines. Okay, but I'll use a straight line so it may be easier for you guys. So I'm just going to draw the straight line from here. And I'll just do that again for you guys. So I'm going to draw the straight line from this mechanism to the gear wheel here. I'm just going to draw that straight line again. So we just want to kind of show the 2 connections. We're not going to leave it there, but we will color them. So I'm going to use the Shift key just to select both of them. And the shape outline, I'll just make it a slightly darker color because they shouldn't be too overpowering. And of course, we don't want to see the chain kind of on top of the gear or the animation. So we'll just select those 2 shapes by using Shift key and bring to front. And that just pops it behind the animation, making it look a little bit cleaner. Now, once you've done all that, essentially that is done. And of course, if you wanted to go ahead and add some more elements, don't be afraid of doing that as well. You might want to put sort of key text on each of those gears themselves, like strategy 1 or process 1 or whatever it may be inside of there. But that's essentially it. That's how you create your gears. So it's just shapes and merge shapes. And of course, it's just adding those extra elements. And don't forget, for gear diagrams, try to make them move. So thanks for that, guys. I hope you enjoyed this exercise and I'll see you again for the next exercise popping up shortly.